One. Hey, it's Norman Maslow of Mazzy, and welcome to another joint video. And this is Style Council. I don't know if that's what it's going to be called, but you already know because you saw the thumbnail. It's We're going to show five artists each of a particular style that dress for success, that wear nice clothes, or just emulate a certain style with their hair, the makeup performance, ongoing for eons and eons. I have a couple that are obvious choices and a few maybe little secret things I'm going to pull out of my bag. We're going to drink cocktails. We're dressing up because, come on, usually what happens is you go to these record shows and record stores and people dress like schlumps. And we decided, me and my collaborator here, Michael, and I want to introduce Michael, we decided to dress up and showcase these records. So, Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun and a little different than I think than what we normally get into.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what? Okay, we have to start with a cocktail. I'm a cocktail guy. I think Michael's a cocktail guy and a cigar guy, but since he's inside, maybe he doesn't drink cigar. I mean, smoke cigars inside.
Maybe
Do
not
you?
today. No, I
Okay,
don't
no
smoke
cigars
inside.
today. I'm a martini guy, and I had this bottle here, and Michael said, "Wait a second, I thought you were a gin guy." Well, this is a brown gin. Brown gin I got into about 5 years ago. Not this particular one, and I just was turned on to this recently, which is local to me, Bainbridge Island, which is just west of Seattle. This is Highside Distilling, and it is infused with distilled with Washington apples. And so usually I'll have a cocktail with a olive, very slight dry vermouth, and but this time I have a twist. So Michael, I think, is mixing something up here as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do a Manhattan for this happy hour. And I always start Manhattans with only one cherry. You know these? Luxardo
I
cherries.
do, I do.
Yes. These things are like crack. So let's see if I can stab them. Sometimes it's difficult.
So those of you who watch my channel and don't know, Michael is a professional musician. He's an oboist with, is it the Phoenix?
Tucson Symphony Orchestra.
Sorry, all those southern places are the
That's
same
all
for
right.
me. I'm from Seattle. It's okay. And so he has a lot of his viewers, and you're watching this on either of our channels, are into classical music. So that's why we thought we'd dress up because that's a snooty thing to do. And we want to really put down those rock and roll people that just have no style at ever whatsoever. But in these records, all these artists have some sort of style.
I think in one of the reasons why doing this video appealed to me, and we've talked a little bit about fashion and music and how it relates to music before, but there was a time when the casualization of everything was quite liberating. There was an era where we had the sack suits and everyone was expected to wear the same thing to work and the same thing as business attire, and it was all very uniform and conformist. And so the casualization, both in our everyday lives and in the performing arts, was liberating. But now I think the pendulum has swung too far, where the casualization now is a uniform. If you go to a record show, if you are a band playing on stage and you're wearing anything other than jeans and a t-shirt, it's almost seen as it's not cool because you're trying.
Exactly. And obviously I'm like several generations older than you. And I went through all that. I mean, I wear Levi's, but I tend to wear all black Levi's. Here, see, black Levi's. That's all I wear. Levi's. No trendy jeans, no blue jeans. Went through that period, went through the Neil Young, patches and holes in the thing, the rock and roll 70s, late 60s. But, coming back, Brian Epstein put the Beatles in ties and suits and the velvet collared suits. And then I'm not even showing the Beatles here going through their whole wardrobe in the Sergeant Pepper era and psychedelic era. But the thing is, sometimes it's just an individual, and sometimes there's a whole scene. The whole we talk about the late '60s, '70s when people were wearing a lot of Indian. I want to say raga wear, but uh, saffron colors and paisley things, and that was a really popular thing. But I think while we drink here, we're going to go back and forth and just show these. And again, it's not a definitive list. You're going to be shouting out and writing in the comments a lot of style icons that you like. And of course, even the punk music movement. I don't have any punk records here. You know, mohawks and pins and piercings and tattoos and t-shirts. It is a form of style too. So I've kind of went in the direction of dapperness in a way. And just a little share a little thing. This is one of my favorite hats, and this is the only hat that I own that was custom made for me by a woman who used to be in San Francisco, House of Nines. And look at this lining in there. Isn't that gorgeous? Yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot of hats of this size. I have pork pies, and I have bowlers, and I have sort of sombrero types, and so many types. But when I get dressed up, if I go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah or a funeral, this is the one it's like my dress up hat. So,
in some ways, I envy you, Mazzy, because I cannot pull off a hat, and I think there's two reasons I can't do it.
We get a lot of hair.
I'm too young, and I think hats generally tend to look better the older you get. Two, I'm too tall, and any tall people, we have a different set of style rules. Anything we do that's flashy sticks out way more than someone that's under 6 foot. So I'm 6'2". So anything I do, I have to be 10 times more subtle than people a couple inches shorter than me. I feel like that's the case, right?
Well, that's part of it. But like it's so funny how many people I run into and say, "Wait, are you so and so?" And it's nothing about YouTube or my channel. It's like a lot of bald guys with goatees and glasses. We all look alike. And so they think I look like someone else they know or they met that same kind of person. But also, it is a self-preservation. It protects your bald head. Being a bald guy wearing a hat is a cliche, and I like it. I mean, I don't get dressed up like this all the time or anything, but it is nice, and I think for this video, it's appropriate. And so let's just jump into the records. And are you ready? Do you have your drink ready? Oh, you still got to make your drink.
I gotta pour it. I did mix it, so because you introduced what you were drinking, I'm gonna show. I'm making a Manhattan, and I'm making a Manhattan the right way, which means with rye, not with bourbon. And we're drinking some Pikesville rye whiskey. 2 ounces of rye whiskey, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. I have this Grassati vermouth from Turin. And then, of course, nothing's complete without Angostura bitters.
Right,
so
right.
I have the wrong part of the label. So let's, I think this is about ready.
Da, 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 da. This is so good. This is so good. You do not have the flavor of an apple. So for those of you who are unprofessionals, don't go in a friggin' bar and order an appletini. That is not what this is.
All right. So do you want to show the first record, or should I?
You're the guest.
All right.
Well, actually, no. Yeah.
So I kind of pulled from all over, but one person I wanted to talk about, and his out of all the records I'm showing, I think his style is the one that transfers the most into what I try to, I guess, shoot for in my most thoughtful dressing. Is that but Elvis Costello. And I think this is one of the most iconic covers out of this entire era of rock and roll. I mean, with the suit and the little details on the suit, the tie knot, the photograph, the angle. I think this is just one of the coolest things. And the whole band, Elvis Costello and the Attractions, the whole band dressed well. And it was they're one of the first artists I saw that made, suits and ties and shoes and things like that were not casual. They made it cool and edgy and counterculture. There was like the influence of the Who on this type of dressing and like the British mod culture, but it was also like American R&B artists and like the straight-laced black blues stuff of the 50s and the 60s. They all kind of took influence from that. Yeah, I think they hit at the time when there was like a mod revival going on already in the UK too.
Right. The jazz and blues artists were always dressing up. They were wearing ties. See the Coltrane picture, say Miles Davis. Now, I didn't pick Miles, but Miles went through a a Renaissance influenced by his girlfriend and wife, Betty Davis at the time, to dress up and get hip and get a little more loose and psychedelic. But I didn't bring that, but I love that, and I love that he has that Hasselblad. And I remember when that came out, the cover. I think there's several different covers and positions of that Hasselblad. You can get different like collector's versions. Now
Oh
would be a
yeah.
big thing. You'd get variants, color variants. Um, but oh God, yeah, and also he was one of the first that I recall, and this is it is stylistically, but it's about the instrument. He brought back the Fender Jazzmaster guitar
Ah.
because when I was growing up, and I wanted my a good electric guitar, my parents for my bar mitzvah gave me it was a used, but it turned out to be my bar mitzvah was 1967, so I got a 1964 blonde Fender Jazzmaster, which when you're a kid, it was the uncoolest guitar because it was everybody was doing Gips or SGs, and they were doing Stratocasters or maybe Telecasters, but even Telecasters were more country. But the Stratocaster was the guitar Hendrix played and Clapton to a point, although he did do the Gibson. But the Jazzmaster was a surfer guitar, and by my point, the Beach Boys and the Surf Rock was not cool and not hip. And then in the late 70s or 77 when that album or 78, 77, 78, that album came out, Elvis is playing that brown wooden Jazzmaster, and all the punk bands and the new wave bands, and then
The
later bands
Smiths.
like Smiths, Johnny Marr, and Sonic Youth, and I mean that's even later. But they got those because they were cheap and nobody wanted them, and they brought the whole style of those things back, and I just love that.
Yeah. Now they're very desirable guitars.
Yeah, I actually have a Johnny Marr Jaguar, the Jaguar. So um, I'm starting out with the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra. I mean, you're talking about someone who sported hats like ain't like no one else, Frank Sinatra. And I have two examples here, these two, but you could pick 25, 30 albums of Sinatra with his hats. You see the picture of him at the main studio at the tower at the Capitol Tower, the house that Nat Cole built on Sunset and Vine, and you see him always wearing the tie, always wearing the hat, the coolest cat, the greatest look, Frank Sinatra. I just think it's just great style. Now, having said that, that's a generational thing too. That's the generation, and he grew up at that point where everyone was wearing suits and ties. You look at these pictures. Um, I'm from San Francisco, and I look at these pictures from even up to the 50s, early 60s. All the men were wearing hats. Go to New York, all the men were wearing hats. Even LA to a point, but LA is a whole different beast. But I miss that, and when I
Yeah.
travel, I was going to New York once or twice a year for the last decades. I love being able to dress up, put an overcoat on, put a hat on, wearing a sport coat out. Even in San Francisco, where it's cooler, you can wear a sport coat, you can dress up sometime. And again, not all the time. And I'm not going to sound snooty for those of you out there that just want to wear a Grateful Dead tie-dye T-shirt. And that's fine too. I like that too. But I move up to Seattle, and when 8 years ago, and everyone up in Seattle dresses like shit. It's like it's.
If
I mean,
Mazzy, if you think people in Seattle dress like shit, you should come to Arizona.
I've been to the South. I haven't been to Arizona, but I've been to Santa Fe and I mean shorts. It's a casual wear, and I do get it. So I'm being snooty on purpose, and those of you who watch me kind of know that. But like when you live in a cooler climate like Seattle or San Francisco or New York, when it gets really cold, or you could dress up, but come on, have a little style. Wear the cool T-shirt, not the T-shirt with the face that goes down to your gatkas, as they say in Yiddish. You want a cool hipster T-shirt. I mean, I like that. So, all right, your turn.
All right, what should I go to next? I think I will pull out something very different. I will pull out Susie and the Banshees. Specifically, this
Ooh,
is Kaleidoscope. Specifically, I'm talking mostly about Susie Sue, but everyone in this band had a. I mean, to me, this is like aesthetically and visually, this is the pinnacle goth band. I mean, I know the Cure, maybe musically, may be more of like the iconic goth band, but nothing really matches. I think the visual style that Susie Sue was able to kind of just popularize and make her own. And it was hugely influential because after they came out, so many bands went and traveled with that look. Like particularly like a band that I follow a lot that's a Japanese band that was active in the early 90s was Kurayume. And I mean, they pretty much lifted, especially in their early days, they lifted like, especially the singer Kiyoharu, like they lifted that look completely from Susie and the Banshees. A little bit Dead or Alive, yeah. but mostly Susie and the Banshees. And it so like the heavy eye makeup, the dark, like a lot of them would wear like the black pinstripe suits, like the overlarge black pinstripe suits. I know Susie would wear a lot of blazers, a lot of stuff like all black hair, black makeup, and then this bright, colorful blouse or something like that. The heavy contrasts almost make the outfit like more depressing and more beautiful.
Well, you're getting into the goth thing, you know. You're getting into, or and then also in the British, what is it, the early '80s, the Robert Smith, Echo and the Bunnymen, and the Cure, and that, yeah, the heavy eye makeup and the black again. I mean, to me, black is the ultimate color of dress, and I love dark colors, and I love black. And it sounds so cliche, it goes with everything, but it is. It's this whole thing reminded me especially there's one artist, my second to last artist I picked here, reminds me of, whether you like or not, if you're an Apple boy or an Apple fan, or what's the term, Steve Jobs, who had like drawers full of black turtlenecks, and that's all he would wear, black turtlenecks and Levi's every day. So he didn't have to worry about what he was going to wear. That's all he wore day after day after day. And there's something, maybe ridiculous about it to some people, but there's something sort of brilliant about it, that like you want to have a certain style, but you don't want to have to think about it. So,
yeah. You also don't want it to be a gimmick either.
Well, and a lot of these people, I mean, this next person that I'm going to go into here, some would say is a gimmick. And I think this is probably the most iconic of the fashion people and the trendy people, but he always seemed to be ahead of everyone. And by the time he was ahead and people were copying him, he was on to something else. And that is David Bowie. I mean, how can you not talk about style and fashion without talking about David Bowie? I mean, from Ziggy Stardust, and the first time I saw him was in San Francisco Winterland at Ziggy Stardust tour. Wow, really different for the time. This is 1972 when, I'm listening to Crosby, Stills and Nash and singer-songwriters and, James Taylor and all that. And, David Bowie comes along. How great is that? But of course, he really, really changes it up. The next time I saw him, and I don't have a good representation here of it, but is the Thin White Duke tour, where he's all in this beautiful white suit, vest, bright lights. That concert at the Cow Palace was just white light. Now, in retrospect, people looking back on it now, and the whole revisitation of it is he looked like the Nazi thing, that white supremacy thing, but that's not what he was going after. But it was certain, like a simplistic look after going through all the face makeup of the albums prior to that and the androgynous look and everything. And then finally, the only one I'd picked is this album, David Bowie's Monsters, Scary Monsters. And he kind of goes, if you've seen the videos, he goes, is it the Pagliacci? What's the clown? The Caruso?
Yeah, Pagliacci,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, he there's a video and he just takes it off of that opera that, no picture in here.
I think that's the last truly great Bowie album. The last truly iconic one.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, then he was always kind of trending a certain thing. Then he got very dapper in his later years, in the perfect suit and the perfect hat. You see those last pictures in the last year of his life with the hat in the streets. There's one photograph on the streets of Manhattan. It's just so beautifully classic. So my choice now is David Bowie. I couldn't do this video without showing David Bowie.
Of course not. Yeah. I think actually my favorite David Bowie album is Station to Station. I think
so
because that era, I mean, he went through so many different eras, and yeah, I mean, Ziggy Stardust, it's impossible not to love the Ziggy Stardust Aladdin Sane era, but with the Thin White Duke and with Station to Station, what he was doing was, you know, there was this clean cut nature to it. I mean, I think that there was a rumor he was eating nothing but bananas and cocaine through that whole period.
Oh, I'm
And he
sure.
lost a ton of weight, and he was wearing these white suits, and but there was a darkness under that. It was probably his darkest era, I think.
Yeah.
It was almost like it reminds me of the film American Psycho, where it's really like it beneath that clean American like exceptional exterior, the materialist exterior is this like deeply disturbed soul, and that to me that's what like that's album Station to Station has, and the music on it is a little darker than his other music. I don't think there's a darker album than Station to Station except for Black Star.
And Black Star is it's gotten up there in one of my all-time favorite albums in the top 50 or 100 or whatever. But I remember the first time my friends, these two twin brothers, the Zimmerman brothers in San Francisco, the first guys I know that had this really tweaked out cassette deck in their car, like really massive, like amazing sound, like it sounded better than any of our stereos. And I hadn't heard this record yet. I don't know why, because I was working in record stores, or maybe I just hadn't listened to it yet. And I remember he put it on, and Station to Station came on, and it's like what the first 3 or 4 minutes, like that, it just builds up with that kind of almost train like dun dun. And maybe I was stoned, I don't know, but I was mesmerized, and it was just so beautiful, beautiful. I mean, for years I thought that David Bowie was covering Nina Simone with "Wild as the Wind." I didn't realize it wasn't an original for that song, but I love this album. You're right. Okay.
All right. Well, now I am gonna get into the mod stuff, and there was a few things I could have picked. I mean, the first band that came to mind was the Jam. I mean, if we're talking mod revival in that type of style with like a little bit of a punk edge, like the Jam are the band. But I think the more interesting choice, and the one I ultimately grabbed, was this band from Washington, D.C. called Nation of Ulysses. And I'm going to show their album. This is Plays Pretty for Baby. This is from 1992. And I have terrible glare here, but there we go. And there's so much going on in this album cover and just the aesthetic of this band. I mean, they really are going for like the 70s UK revival mod scene, and they're a much more aggressive band than those mod bands. I mean, they're really playing a style of music that I think most people would call post-hardcore, which is it's like hardcore punk with a more melodic, more progressive edge. And they had a whole theming. I mean, there's a lot of like vintage Americana baked into their music and their imagery. I mean, they have the 3-button suits and a lot of like this kind of, you can see that the cover is done in this like 50s atomic age style layout. I'll show another one of their albums here, 13-Point Program to Destroy America. And
That's a great cover. That's a great cover.
Yeah, and they were always dressing in. I mean, and they were in the exact wrong time for this, because this is like late '80s Washington D.C. This is the rise of, you know, if you're playing in anything other than band shirts and ripped jeans, like you're a poser. And they came in and they were wearing the band leader. I forget his name. Gamboa. This guy, he's the person I think of when I think of the Ben Sherman gingham shirts, like the gingham check shirts. He
Right.
wore those like almost every show, and they were always wearing like suits and ties, but it was always like very disheveled. It was because they were playing these sweaty punk shows where everyone was standing on the floor in front of them. There was no stage or anything. So I think this band really exudes a cool factor. And what's interesting is there's a band that came a little while later that almost copied their aesthetic and style almost exactly, and that's a band from Sweden called The Refused. And the sound is different, the music is different, but the aesthetic is almost spot on for what they were going for. So, but I thought I would go with the original instead of the imitator.
That's so cool, because I've seen that album cover, but I've never heard the record. So it's for me, it's great to be introduced to something like that. Well, my next choice, this is from the 1970s, and man, this is a time in the early mid 70s when, it was long hair, jeans. It wasn't about dressing up, and the David Bowies of the world and the Progs. It was maybe long capes and the Rick Wakeman capes. I'm not showing Prog. However, there was a lead singer in one band who had a separate parallel solo career to his band. His band had amazing, iconic album covers of these beautiful, almost ethereal, dreamlike goddesses, women, and just perfect women, but in a surreal photographic aspect. And of course, the band I'm referring to is Roxy Music, but the lead singer is Brian Ferry. And Brian Ferry had a series of records, and none of those records up until the end, when they got more poppy in a way and clinical before the Eno days and or after the Eno days, didn't have any of the band on the cover at all. And he comes out, and also early on, when everyone had long hair, including Brian Eno before he, got bald like me, he was he looked like the banker. He always looked like the insurance guy, the banker, or the James Bond type. And these albums, especially when this came out, at this point in time, wearing sort of a white tux, casual bow tie, and then even this, and I could bring on a bunch of records where he is so stylish, he is so suave, he is so cool. Here we kind of, on the back of this album, The Bride Strips Bare, it emulates maybe a Roxy Music cover that he chose. But his whole thing to me is a classy act, and he always had this dapperness. And I love his music, and most of his, for the most part, his solo albums are amazing, but they're all, not all, but most cover songs. And he does cover songs from Dylan to the Beatles to even Roxy Music. He covers a song here and there. He does it in his own way. These two, or this is an original, beautiful record. This is recently there's a series of reissues of these that are cut at Abbey Road, but supposedly, unlike the half-speed masters Abbey Road's been putting out, these are cut from original tapes, I think, so they say, and they really sound good. The bass, the mid-range, and I blasted these on my new amp. I only have 3 of these because I have originals of the other. They sound really good, but I'm going with Brian Ferry because he's an icon of fashion, of style to this day. And, again, against the current, against what people were looking like and wearing like in the 70s into the 80s and beyond, Brian Ferry.
Well, you just showed me an artist that I'd never even heard of before. So
you've heard of Roxy Music, obviously.
Yes, of course I've heard of Roxy Music, but I've never listened to any of Brian Ferry's stuff.
Well, it's cover stuff. It's catchy. It's unusual because he's got that unusual voice. So check it out.
I will. Before I show another record, I was talking about mod stuff and I completely forgot to show this. I mean, you know this movie, right?
Oh, Quadrophenia, of course.
Yeah. I don't think this movie is a perfect representation of what that actual scene was like, but it's so interesting to me as someone who wasn't alive during any of this, like watching a like counterculture youth movement that's so centered around like dressing up to the nines. I thought that was really interesting, and seeing the fashion in this movie. I mean, I know the whole message of the movie is that it's all kind of empty. I mean, there's a lot of emptiness in that group conformity, but at the same time, like you see Sting in those suits, or you see like the main character when he's got his new custom suit on, and there's a cool factor that you just can't escape. And so like that movie was like the introduction to like a lot of the polo shirts I wear are these Fred Perry polos because they're so connected to that UK mod scene. And you gotta wear them buttoned up all the way to the top of the collar, and you like pair it with like a mat coat or something like that.
Well, that's an interesting thing because I've had like heavy debates about the idea of where in the 80s, the whole thing in the 80s, in the art direct, I had a lot of art director friends because of advertising and design, and it was all about black coats, white shirts, no ties, but you button your top button. And I still like it. And I had a argument with a friend of mine, a woman who's about 20 years younger than me, and she goes, "No, you don't button that top button." And I like the way it looks. And now we're getting into the style. This is exactly what it's about. I like the way it looks. Maybe not for your shirt, but maybe.
I think for polo shirts, especially these really structured polo shirts like the Fred Perry shirts, where there's like a lot of, they have the these always have like the piping on the collar, and so there's a lot of clean line there. So if you button up all the way, it looks really like put together and clean. But I think for like the regular Oxford shirts, I tend not to button them up all the way. I don't. For me, I don't like how that looks. But I mean, it's working for your shirt. So
Half the people watching this video right now just turned it off and we started really getting into buttoning our shirts at the top. Where's the friggin' record? We want to talk about the music, not the stuff. But this is a style video. This is style
no,
council.
this is what they signed up for.
Exactly.
I will say, I almost never wear this shirt, but I busted it out today. Do you ever watch Top Gear?
Yes, the car guys.
Yeah.
Or
So
not a lot.
I
not a lot.
I bought this shirt because James May, one of the hosts of Top Gear. I don't think anyone ever considers him like a style icon. He's not really a style icon or even that stylish of a guy, but he is a smart dresser. And he would always wear on Top Gear. He would always wear these floral shirts with like a simple like blazer or even with just untucked with jeans or whatever. And that kind of inspired me to go out and buy one of these once I started watching a lot of Top Gear.
And that's actually something. And I'm trying to think of the record. It was the Monkees album. I'm looking here, Monkees albums. The one where it's almost like their version of Rubber Soul cover wise. Oh, it's more of the Monkees. Okay, I'm just going to show this real quick, just because. Here, I didn't pull this, but when this album came out, you can't see it very well here. Striped shirts, solid shirts with white collars and white cuffs. This was the pinnacle. This is 1967, 68-ish. Mod was really happening. J.C. Penney's had a line of monkey shirts, and I asked my mother, and I bought one of those shirts with the white collars, and it would be the Mickey Jones or the Davy Jones or the Mickey Dolenz shirt. So it does influence. Style influences. Now we're in the world of influencers. Whatever they wear, whatever they buy, you emulate. It's not far in rock and roll. We get a Beatle haircut, or we dress up in the punk scene, whatever it is.
But that's how culture evolves. Culture is never entirely original. Culture takes something. Culture is a combination of influences, and then they combine to form something new. The most interesting composers in the world, they learned from a tradition, and they took what they learned from that tradition and they did something new with it.
Is the Franz Liszt style like sweeping the world right now, sweeping the nation?
The Franz Liszt style?
I don't know what that is.
I don't know aesthetically, but what's
I don't know what that is. I'm just making shit up.
Liszt, but it relates because Liszt, in many ways, took a lot from Chopin, and Liszt was kind of the fusion of like Chopin and Wagner in a way. So he was taking the influences of the musicians that came before him and synthesizing it into his own voice.
See, I remember when I first started getting. It's funny because I'm going to be talking about this about when I do my classical thing, which I'm going to do in the next few weeks. But Wagner, I got turned on to because of the Beatles. Because Prelude to Lohengrin, Act 2 or Act 3, I forgot which one it is used in Help, Beatles' Help, and it's on the American version. And so 1965, I'm 12 years old, 11 years old, and I'm hearing Wagner and I'm hearing Beethoven's Ninth in the movie. I'm getting turned on to classical music, da 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 da. And to me, I remember a few years later, we started talking about Wagner as the Led Zeppelin of classical music, because it was just this intensity. And I could be wrong, but that's how I saw that music at the time. Well, a few years later.
Yeah, well, I could talk about Wagner for a while, but let's get back. I need to show a record.
Yes, okay.
All right, I'm going to show something a little out of left field now. This is a band I've talked about a lot on my channel, and they only have 2 records available on vinyl that you can buy out of their really big discography. But this is a band out of Japan, a metal band called Duran Gray. And I'm gonna. This is the big giant box set of their Ouroboros album, and the actual album art of this album is based on King Crimson. Actually, King Crimson's Lizard album.
Oh yeah, I see that.
But this is their album from 2008. They have this one, and they have another album on vinyl that came out in 2011 that I think actually are their best albums. But unfortunately, there's no like pictures of the band in these albums. But The interesting thing about this band, this is a band that came about in the mid 90s in Japan, and they came from a scene in Japan that was called Visual K. Visual K, which basically translates to visual style or like visual flair, was something that came about in the late 80s in Japan that was a very weird hybrid fusion of American hair metal like Def Leppard and all that stuff, British like goth and neo romantics, so like Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, and then like new wave like stuff like Dead or Alive and things like that, and then a little bit of glam rock, so like David Bowie and things of that nature. And the style all kind of melded into this new thing and became a huge thing in underground rock music in Japan. And Darren Gray came out of that, and I'll just show you. This is the last. There's a lot of bands that were dressing like this in the late 90s. I mean, one of the big bands that they took influence from was this band, this new wave band called Bucktick. And Bucktick. And I'll see if I can show you. I have this picture disc here of them with the giant hair and the leather jackets and just the makeup and all that. And so Darren Gray formed in the mid '90s, and they started in that scene. And this is the CD cover of their first single, and it's just like it's androgynous. It's like overly thematic makeup and crazy hair and these intricate costumes. This is from 1998.
Wow.
And
I mean, it's like the Cure. It's like the Cure in those bands.
But it's a little different, and it's kind of its own thing. But they came out of that, and they eventually kind of left that scene and became more of a serious band. They started touring in America and in Europe a lot, and became kind of like this is a band that became like a heavy metal band. So they were touring with like Slipknot and like big American heavy metal bands. But in recent years, they've kind of gone back to an interesting visual aesthetic, and like the stuff they've been putting out in the last couple years. Like the singer Kyo is the main person who has this like very interesting visual approach, where he'll mix high fashion with low fashion. So like he has a solo project called Sukekyo, and there's this whole live concert they filmed where he's wearing like a Chanel suit, but he's wearing like the Chanel suit with like this crazy like bloody makeup across his mouth and like all these interesting piercings. Like here's a recent shot of the band, and you can tell they have an interest in developing their own visual style.
And each one is different too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
I thought I'd show some of their albums. Unfortunately they don't release enough stuff on vinyl because just Japan doesn't. That's not something they do. But yeah, all their albums are kind of an interesting. They're good at world building.
Okay. Do you have more or?
Of that band?
My second. Yeah. Is that okay? I'm sorry. I got caught with my martini down.
Yeah.
My ice is melted. Okay. It's okay. I'm just in the middle of a sec. Never drink more than one martini, and especially never more than two martinis. Okay.
What about 3 martini lunches?
No. Oh God. No. Okay. In 1984, 1985, if you went to a club in New York City and maybe LA and the major cities, no offense to the smaller towns, and you hung around the club scene, every girl, young woman dressed like this.
Oh yeah.
I mean, come on. That's what two more. Okay, Madonna. I love Madonna. Madonna just did things her way, pushed it. I remember getting this album as a promo for my Warner Brothers friend, and I had no idea what it was. I played it. It was interesting. Obviously, then it took off, and I got into it. And around that time, I think the film Desperately Seeking Susan came out, and she was kind of in that semi-thrift store bustier underwear type of style look. Like 3 artists I have here, and I'm kind of giving myself away here, but like Bowie, Madonna, and Prince, they evolved stylistically fashion and hair versions as much as anyone else. To me, this is a magnificent album cover. One of the great Hollywood type photographers, Herb Ritz, unfortunately died way too young, took a bunch of pictures in the fashion scene of Madonna. Um, David Fincher worked on a lot of her videos, who became this great director, but started out in the video scene of the MTV days. You know, she was like one of the perfect artists to grow and develop during the time of MTV, the visualization of everything. And to me, she is amazing. But this too, I want to show this because, like a prayer Madonna, my copy still smells. I know the art director, a woman named who worked at Warner Brothers Records, and now I just blanked on her name. Oh, Jerry Hayden, and this is also a Herb Ritz shot. Jerry Hayden was an art director at Warner Brothers Records. Now has her own design company called Smog Design. Does the Petty albums, but she did the Van Halen covers for Warner Brothers and so much. But she talks about this album where, you know, they go through the frames of photography, and obviously since I'm a photo agent, I've worked on photo shoots for years, and you're looking for that hero shot. And the hero frame, you know, before digital and then during digital, is that one shot. You know, you probably take hundreds and hundreds of shots and variations in full figure and face. You do a whole several days, in this case, probably budget-wise, of photo shoot. And they pick this, and it's kind of a softer version of it. Like, looks like it was filtered. It's not a sharp picture, but the great thing, Madonna wanted it to smell like patchouli oil. So they would do with the printer who printed these covers, went through all these tests and came up with something in the printing, in the inks, to have the smell like patchouli. And the only other, I mean, there's a handful of records like that. The band The Raspberries with Eric Carmen, there's one album they did. And I remember that was when I was working in record store days in the 70s. You go to the R's, it always smelled like raspberries. It was like scratch and sniff type of stuff. So, I mean, Madonna, you can't deny her style. Now, whether you like it or not and you want to dump on it, I think she's a fantastic artist. She had a long career. I mean, she still has a career, but I think it's not the same thing. But her career kept lasting. And whenever everyone thought that she was over, she came up with something new, and all the power to her. And I really admire her. So Madonna has got to be on my list.
You know, it's funny. I remember, like, I think the cultural saying in like the late 50s and early 60s was that everyone is either Jackie Kennedy or Marilyn Monroe. And I feel like in the 80s it was everyone's either Madonna or Cyndi Lauper.
And Madonna was Marilyn Monroe, you know? I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, she was. So, yeah, definitely. All right.
All right, last
Take it,
one.
take it.
Let's see. What
Last way. No, it's not your last one.
I think it's my last one. Yeah. I mean, I could
No,
show
no.
more records, but
How many did you pick?
4 artists. I picked 5 artists total.
I picked 10. Okay, I gotta. Okay.
Oh no, wait, we can keep going. It's all right. We'll keep going.
Let's go faster, but no, I picked 10, so I got to get through these. We're gonna go on. What do you,
Okay.
those of you who have signed off, you know, give me a break, put it on pause, go have a cocktail, come back and watch part 2. I'm not going to post it as part 2, so we're going on.
All right. Well, this is. I think this will be a somewhat controversial pick, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I picked My Chemical Romance. And
okay.
yes, and I know this is like, for people that lived through this era of music, My Chemical Romance went from being like one of the most new, exciting, popular bands to being kind of like so culturally ubiquitous that they almost became like eye-roll inducing, and they spawned so many copycat bands. But the fact that a band like this became super popular in the mid 2000s, I think was really unique. And I wish these albums came with like band photos, but they really kind of don't.
I found that too when I was going through it. There were some things I really wanted to show because I know what they look like, but they weren't photographs on the albums.
Yeah, I guess this is as close as we're gonna get. So I mean, this is their big breakout major label debut. 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge, and then I'm a big fan of their debut album, which is I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love. And for those that don't know My Chemical Romance, which I'm sure is most people like over the age of 40, um, this was a band that came about in the mid 2000s that came from like the northeastern New Jersey punk rock scene, but they had an interesting edge to them, and they kind of became to epitomize like what we think of as like mid 2000s like radio friendly emo music.
Hmm?
But they started out as a really interesting group because they blended a lot of influences together. Like they were incredibly influenced by the punk band The Misfits, and they have a lot of the horror punk aesthetic of The Misfits. I mean, their lyrics are incredibly like morbid, almost like comic book horror levels of morbid. And a lot of their aesthetic also came from like Morrissey and the Smiths. Actually, a lot of their early releases have Morrissey covers on them. They do a really, really great cover of what I think is Morrissey's best song, which is Jack the Ripper, which sadly we never got a studio recording of. It's only available as a live
Really?
track. But
Is
they
that
they
on?
did a
Is that
cover.
on? Is that on Rank? Is that on Rank? No,
No, this is
it's not.
Morrissey's solo album. This is
Oh,
on.
solo. Got it.
Yeah,
Got
I
it.
forget. I forget which album it's on. It's on one of his live albums, but they covered Jack the Ripper on one of their early singles, and
I
they
don't
would do.
have
I
any of
think
his live. Yeah.
they would do a lot of like Morrissey and Misfits covers. Like on there was a soundtrack where they covered the Misfits Astro Zombies, and also like the singer Gerard Way was really into comic books, and he even like would do draw his own comic books, and so a lot of their aesthetic would come from like comic book horror. But here was a band that like got play on MTV and got really big, and they had a visual style. They were wearing the dark suits. They were sometimes in some of their videos they would wear like they would do like the prep school uniforms, but there would be like a dark edge to it. So like think like Dead Poets Society, but like with like black dyed black hair and black eyeliner and black nail polish. Um, they were one of the first big bands where they were on TV and they were guys wearing eyeliner. I mean, this hadn't been seen since David Bowie.
Hmm.
So I think and they did a lot to popularize like dark, punky, kind of like Castle Wolfenstein esque, Castle Dracula esque horror punk, which I think is really cool because there's a lot of interesting horror punk in the 80s and 90s. There's the Misfits, there's AFI, there's stuff like that, but it never really broke into the mainstream. And MCR was kind of the group that broke that into the mainstream.
You know what's interesting about this whole conversation is that there are artists that all of a sudden do something seemingly original. Now, anything original, it's brought by something. It could be generations ago, it could be decades ago, it could be in history, it could be, like during the Adam and the Ant and Bow Wow Wow, going to Renaissance and going to the historical uh, wear, design wear, things like that. Um, but what's really kind of interesting is that then there are all these bands that just jump on the bandwagon. That all of a
Yeah.
sudden they're wearing something and a style where Madonna. Then there was a Madonna wannabes, or you know, even Bruce Springsteen, working man, the working man shirt and jeans. And there's a handful of artists, Bon Jovi or whoever, that just jump on that style. And not to take away from them, but there's a scene. There's a scene whether it's the Manchester scene and Factory Records, San Francisco psychedelia, the New York punk scenes, the CBGBs. Like I was thinking of even someone like Debbie Harry, which I didn't bring. You talked about the whole Marilyn Monroe thing. She's right out of that style thing. So my next artist, I'm just going to show just so briefly. There's not much I can say about him, but the whole psychedelic thing I mentioned with Paisley and psychedelic colors and Indian influence colors of orange and purples and everything, and that's got to be Jimi Hendrix. And um, you know, Jimi Hendrix was not the only person dressed like this. Everyone from the Rolling Stones to the Beatles but to me, Jimi Hendrix rocked it better than most. And as much the Beatles did, they had their moment in '67 dressing like this, but then by '68 they were out of it. By '66 they were doing something else. Hendrix kind of went with this to a point, and it just seems he's the iconic person that to have this kind of flowery, floral look like this, which is to me just amazing. And the whole '60s psychedelic thing in the UK and San Francisco, especially those places, Pink Floyd, Sid Barrett, it was a scene. But to me, Jimi Hendrix is the one.
Yeah, he owned it better than everyone else. He really went all in,
Totally.
and was just kind of so energetic in his flamboyance that other people, like, the Beatles could never match that. They're too reserved. They're too shy.
Exactly, exactly. As much, and I didn't purposely, I looked at the Beatle records and I was going to think, oh, Sergeant Pepper, but they, as much as they were ahead stylistically, they were more ahead musically than a lot of people. And the fashion obviously emulated what they were doing at the time, but they were like little blips and pieces. And maybe you could say that about any of these artists, but it just didn't seem to work. But Hendrix was the one for that, from my point of view.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to. If you have more records, I'm gonna have to pull some more stuff. Let me see here.
Okay. Well, while you're pulling something, I'll show my next one because it emulates Jimi Hendrix, and I'll just do it real quick. That's Prince. I mean, Prince is like the heir apparent to Jimi Hendrix, and he kind of went with it musically, but like, the hat, the style, everything he did was so different and so stylistic. So that's my next pick. But to me, it's like 20, 30 years later, 20, 25 years later, whatever it was, Prince, you know, got funky, as great and psychedelic and musical Jimi Hendrix was. He wasn't really funky in the, Prince brings in James Brown and Sly Stone and fuses it with Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles and all these other artists. So that's Prince. So I did two back to back. So your turn.
All right. This is off the top of my head, but one band that, again, is going to be a little bit similar to the Jammin' aesthetic, but you're probably familiar with the group Pulp, right?
Yep.
Yeah, to me, Pulp. I never got into a lot of '90s Britpop, but Pulp are definitely my favorite Britpop band. I think they're much better than Oasis, and I'm trying to think, what are the other big Britpop bands? Blur. Yeah, I think Pulp is 10 times better than any of those other groups. There's a sinister edge to them, especially the vocal delivery. I forget the name of their vocalist, but the vocal delivery reminds me a lot of David Bowie. There's a lot of that kind of sinister, buttoned up quality to the delivery of this band, and you can see there's a lot more color in this than a lot of other mod type bands. But I mean, you check out.
Is he wearing a puffy? Is he wearing a puffy shirt or paisley shirt? I can't tell.
Paisley shirt. It looks like a paisley shirt. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember years ago I saw the music video for the single Lip Gloss from this band, and I was just like, what is this? I'd never seen something so poppy yet so edgy.
Nice. Okay, I'm going with the Talking Head, but it's really David Byrne, right? And you cannot talk about style without talking about the big suit. The big suit in Stop Making Sense, the big suit theatrical Jonathan Demme concert film that was set for film, which is one of the greatest sounding records. You don't need an audiophile version. This record is fantastic. This sounds so great, so immediate. This is one of the first records in the handful of first records I played on my new Hagel, and it sounds great. And the big suit, but look at this. I mean, this is the Talking Heads, and it's all inspired really by David Byrne and his vision. He's the artist of the group, not taken away from the rest of the Tina Weymouth and Chris and Jerry Harrison, but he's got that vision all the way up to his current New York production, which I'm dying to see. I'll probably never see it, but look at the style on this. I mean,
oh wow,
this is American Utopia, and the vision of this. I'm sure he works with a collaborator, with a stylist. It's just a gray suit, bare feet. If you've seen the clips of him performing and them performing it, you can find them all over YouTube. It's so amazing, so conceptual, so beautiful. David Byrne, to me, is a visionary, quirky guy, strange guy, but as an artist, there's no doubt about it. And he's an iconic figure from the punk scene, and more the new wave scene, the CBGBs, to Psycho Killer, to the African beats they brought on, to the collaborations with Eno, uh, and amazing artists. So David Byrne.
All right, I'm gonna pull out another. Oh
Yep,
wow,
I just wanted to show that picture again.
that's a cool photograph.
Isn't that great? That's so great.
Yeah.
I just would like to see it because it's so minimal as a set wise. I've seen a bunch of Broadway musicals, and to see this would be really wonderful.
Well, I was trying to find in these albums that I'm about to show. I was trying to find pictures of the band, but unfortunately, I can't see them. So you just have to go off my descriptions. But there's a lot in the aesthetic layout of this album I want to talk about. And this is another band from my childhood. This is a group called the Blood Brothers. This is their album Byrne, Piano Island Byrne, which I think is their best album. These guys were a punk band. I think most people would call them post-hardcore, but they were kind of this frantic, glammy, dancey punk band. And they're some of my favorite aggressive bands, period, are bands that have two singers, and they had two singers. Rather, I should say they had two screamers.
Huh.
So the interesting thing musically about this band is they would put down these really kind of dancey punk tunes. They were dancey tunes. They would have like Hammond organ or different types of keyboards. The drummer would be playing like maracas and like these really funky bass lines, but they turn up the tempo like double time, and they'd have these two vocalists, one of whom has this like really low bass baritone voice, and the other who just kind of is a squeaker. And they'd both be screaming and singing and singing and screaming over these like frantic dancey beats, and it really was kind of an aesthetic. And it was there were a lot of bands that touched on this type of aesthetic in the late 2000s, but I don't think any band did it better than the Blood Brothers. And they had a really interesting style that it's hard to describe. I mean, there was a lot of the mid 2000s like post-hardcore mall punk scene that was in their style. I mean, there was the skinny jeans, the tight band t-shirts, the studded belts, things like that. But they pulled it off better than I think most people. Like I think I know a lot of people that joke about this band is they're the white belt band because everyone in this band would wear like giant white leather belts, and they do like very frizzy disheveled hair and striped like t-shirts that were just like overly tight, like too tight than they should be. And they'd get on stage and they'd dance around, but then they'd be like screaming, banshee shrieking at the top of their lungs. I love this band. I saw them in. I never got to see them when they were around and releasing albums. But one of my favorite memories from when I lived in New York is they had a short like 3-month reunion in like 2014. And I saw them do 2 shows in New York City, one of which was at a festival called the Modern Sky Festival, which is a Chinese music festival that's normally held in Shanghai. And one year they just decided they were going to have it in Central Park in New York City.
Oh, perfect. That's
Yeah,
cool.
and so all these bands got invited. Like I would say 50% of the bands that were playing were Chinese bands, like mainland Chinese bands. And the other 50% were just like random indie bands or whatever, but like the entire audience was like Chinese nationals or Chinese Americans. Like
Wow.
there were not a lot of white people in the audience, and this band played, and it was after like the entire set of the night was like a lot of indie bands. So it was like kind of funky stuff, kind of indie rock guitar stuff. No punk bands, no heavy bands. And then these guys come up, and it's just like it's almost like we could see each other in the crowd, like the 15 other people there that were there for the Blood Brothers. We just like make a mad rush to the front and start like pushing and shoving our way. It was a fun night. I enjoyed seeing these guys in Central Park.
Well, you got to come up with one more. I'm going to just end up with one major one, but before I do that, I'm just going to really quickly mention these two because I was going to get into these, but I don't want to dive deep. But to me, Bjork is important.
Oh, of course.
I mean, for a lot of reasons artistically, and the Man in Black. I mean, how simple is that? The Man in Black, Johnny Cash. But to me, the person I'm going to end up with is not a musician. And he's a fashion designer in a way, which sounds really strange. But he is central into this story and this video we're doing. And ironically, based on my research, which I had no idea before I researched him, it's really important to call him out right now where we are in the world in general. Have you ever heard of Nuta Kotlyarenko?
I have never heard of this person.
I hadn't either, but I do know the name Nudie Cone. Nudie Cone. Now, you might not know his name,
I don't.
but anybody who's into cowboy music, country rock, the Flying Burrito Brothers, the Byrds, on and on and on, have heard of the Nudie Suit. So, Nudie Cohen in the 1940s moved to Hollywood and opened a store in Hollywood, a design store where he invented the nudie suit. Have you ever heard of the term rhinestone cowboy? Cowboy suits
I have heard that, yeah.
with rhinestone. Probably one of the most prolific artists who wore the nudie suit and owned more nudie suits than anyone, who was Porter Wagner. That is a nudie suit.
Huh.
Hank Williams, that's a nudie suit. Probably one of the most famous to a lot of people who watch my channel. These are nudie suits, the Flying Burrito Brothers. And of course, Graham Parsons really rocked the nudie suit. I don't have a copy, I can't believe it, of 50,000 Fans Can't Be Wrong, the Elvis Presley Gold LeMay suit. But Phil Oakes did a parody at Carnegie Hall. Now, says Phil Oakes' Greatest Hits, which is not a Greatest Hits album, but he shows up, shocking his audience, does this thing in a gold lame, kind of a takeoff on the nudie suit. Of course, we got Dolly Parton, who had her versions of nudie suits. We got the trio, obviously, Dolly, Linda, Emmylou Harris, nudie suit. Even rock stars today. I mean, we got Jack White, who rocked the nudie suit. Mike Mills from REM wore the nudie suit. ZZ Top wore the nudie suit. The Rhinestone Cowboy himself, Glenn Campbell, wore the nudie suit. To me, he was born in Kiev, Ukraine. Kiev in the Russian Empire at the time, which we now know as the Ukraine, and especially what's going on in the world. When I found that out, it just kind of, as my people would say, maybe verklempt. I had like an emotional connection. Born in 1902, came to America, made these rhinestone-studded, amazing cowboy suits for Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, the Hollywood cowboy stars, and rock bands would pick up. John Lennon had one made. I never seen a picture of John Lennon wearing a nudie suit, but all these artists, musicians, rock stars, country rock stars, and had these nudie suits, and the nudie suits were like $8,000 to $12,000 a pop. I mean, that's a lot of money then. It's a lot of money now, but and so I just wanted to.
That was like 3 cars back in the day, wasn't it?
God, yeah, I mean, the nudie suit. I mean, people always used to think that the word term nudie is because they thought nude, but that's how his name was, Nuta Kotlyarenko, and I'm probably pronouncing that totally wrong in Russian and Ukrainian, but I thought that was a fitting ending to my presentation here. And he died in 1984, born in 1902, and a tribute to him from me, from Maslov.
Well, it's funny. You pulled out the Byrds and Flying Burrito Brothers, so I went and grabbed my copy of Chris Hillman's autobiography, Time Between. I almost said Time in Between, but Time Between. And I gotta say, the outfit he's wearing on this, which is not a nudie suit, is definitely a stylish outfit, though. He's doing the whole turtleneck and suede jacket.
Well, that's probably 1964, 65. That's probably 65.
Yeah, that's before they went full country.
Right, that's the thing. And if you look in the cover, look at the cover of Rubber Soul by the Beatles, where George Harrison has a brown leather, kind of the brown leather jacket, the brown suede jacket. Style in music is not so strange to anyone. I'm surprised, as far as I know, I haven't seen it presented here, within the vinyl community, within people, but it's an important part. Image is an important part. Record covers, I showcase a lot. It's an important part, and the style, the presentation you do. And I get a little like over the top with my pontification on the snootiness of dressing up once in a while. And a lot of it is tongue in cheek, but I think it's an important part of the image of these bands. We remember these things, from blues players to jazz players to rock, classical musicians. I think it's really great.
All right. Well, I have one more album to show, and
Okay.
because we're talking fashion and aesthetic, the quickest thing I could think of is the German band Rammstein. Are
Oh,
you familiar with?
that just rolled off my tongue too.
Have you heard of Rammstein, Mazzy?
I have not. I have not. I have not.
So
Kann ich even
Rammstein
helfen? Was ist das? I don't know.
are a very interesting. I would call them new metal, like NU metal, band from Germany that got very popular in the late '90s and early 2000s, and they're still around today. And I can't think of a more aesthetic band than Rammstein. So obviously they're from Germany, and they really play up like this. I think always the most interesting bands are bands that are very tongue in cheek with their imaging and aesthetic, and Rammstein is definitely one of those bands where they really play up the macho German, Aryan nature. Like everyone in the band is really like muscly. They're always wearing like very like it's almost like a cross. They take the Nazi iconography, the World War II military iconography, and they push it over into like the comical homoerotic side of it. And if you ever watch their music videos or see their live album or their live videos, they're incredibly theatrical on stage. I mean, I saw one video where the keyboard player for the band is in like a cooking pot, and the singer has a flamethrower on stage, and he's shooting flames at the cooking pot where the keyboard player is playing out of. They do this in their music videos and in their live act. It's pulled off so well. I mean, this album cover is a little bit grotesque, but I think it's quite effective. And then you have the back cover here. Yeah, I think this band is entirely entertaining, and their music isn't even that. Their music isn't that complex. Like musically, there's nothing that interesting. I mean, it's kind of your standard like power chord new metal, but they do the whole package so well. I think it's almost like Wagner had the term like total art, where the fusion of theater and music and visuals and all of that into one art form, and I think Rammstein kind of embody that, even if they're kind of like taking the piss on it.
Are they still together?
Oh yeah, they're still touring.
Oh,
They're still releasing albums, and yeah, they had a really they had a music video that dropped very recently. I forget the name of it. I think it was actually Deutschland über alles or something similar to that, where they were, but it was almost deconstructing that iconography. All their music videos have multiple layers to them, so where at one point it's almost like they'll be making that kind of like ultra machismo fascist iconography look sexy, and then they'll be making it look grotesque, and then they'll be making it look like farcical.
wow.
They're very
Wow.
self-aware, and they're a political band, and they're pretty left wing, so they're very satirical almost.
Hmm. I'm in. I'll check it out. Yeah. Okay, I think we wound down there. We've had our cocktails, we've had our fashion talk, we've had our the icon of design. This is something I've been wanting to do. I wasn't quite sure how to present it, and I hope people out there take it for what it is and just enjoy it, because the whole theatrical thing is really fun. And there's so many other bands, right? So many other artists that we could get into and that cross over that. So thank you, Michael, for coming on to this, sharing this with me. I think I'm getting a little slurry because of this. Second.
Yeah, me too. I haven't had dinner yet, so.
Yeah, either have I. Either have I. So thank you for watching. And there are links below to both our channels, depending on if you're watching this on Michael's Poetry on Plastic, channel or my channel. And please subscribe and do all the great things so we can do more of these. So Mazzy loves you. And any last words, Michael?
No, I think we've traveled all the roads we can go down.
That we are. Okay. Take care, everyone.